My name is Marla Greer. I'm 67 years old. I've always been the kind of woman who believes in quiet order. Linen napkins, folded properly. Mashed potatoes, without lumps. Family dinners that start on time. I suppose that's what makes the moment still echo in my head, the sound of a spoon dropping, then a laugh, then something far worse. It was Sunday evening, the kind of late spring dusk Savannah does so well. Light came through the big dining room window in ribbons, catching the dust and the framed photographs of Ethan's childhood on the wall. I'd cooked all afternoon meatloaf, roasted carrots, and the pecan pie Brittany said she liked. My hands still smelled faintly of butter and thyme. We were halfway through the meal when Brittany leaned back in her chair, glass of wine in hand, and smirked. She looked across the table at Ethan, then back at me. I remember thinking she was about to tell another story from work, something harmless and loud. Instead, she tilted her head, eyes glinting, and said, "My husband says you deserve it." Then she leaned forward and spit directly into my plate. It wasn't a tiny, nervous act, it was deliberate. The wet sound hit the potatoes thick and final. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Ethan blinked. My fork stayed frozen in my hand. Across the table, my grandson Caleb, 10 years old, let out a sharp laugh, then clamped his hand over his mouth. Brittany grinned like she'd told the best joke of the night. Ethan didn't say a word. He just kept chewing. I stared down at the plate. A moment earlier it had been dinner. Now it was something I couldn't look at without feeling my throat tighten. The smell of pepper and gravy turned to metal. I felt my heartbeat in my wrists. I could have shouted. I could have slammed my hand on the table. I could have said the kind of thing that can't be taken back. But I didn't. I set the fork down quietly enough that the clink of it against the china sounded polite. Moments stretched. No one spoke. Then Brittany laughed. It was loud, deliberate a signal. Caleb joined her. Then Ethan, a soft exhale that turned into something like a chuckle. Even my sister-in-law, seated at the far end, smiled uneasily and muttered, "Classic Brittany. Classic." I'd always thought the word meant predictable. Tonight, it meant permission. The sound filled the room. Laughter, sharp, careless, bounced off the walls until it didn't sound human anymore. I remember the chandelier trembling slightly, the shadows of crystal fragments rippling across the tablecloth. The scent of roasted carrots turned sour. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the hardwood, slicing through the laughter like a blade. For a second, everything went still again. Brittany stopped mid-sip. Ethan looked up finally, expression blank, like he was waiting for a cue. "I think that's enough for tonight," I said. My voice didn't shake. It surprised me how steady it sounded, calm, almost detached. I straightened my cardigan and walked toward the kitchen. No one stopped me. In the kitchen, the sink was full of warm water and soap bubbles, the smell of lemon detergent heavy in the air. I washed my hands, even though they weren't dirty. Through the open doorway, I could hear chairs shifting, silverware clinking, someone turning on the television. They'd moved on already. When I turned to leave, Brittany's voice drifted in high and amused. Guess she couldn't take a joke. I reached for my purse on the counter, looped the strap over my shoulder, and walked back through the dining room. Caleb was licking icing from his thumb. Ethan's phone buzzed beside his plate. The house I had once helped buy my name, still on the loan, felt smaller than it ever had. At the doorway, I paused. I thought maybe Ethan would look up, meet my eyes, offer anything, a word, a gesture, something human. He didn't. Outside, the air was thick and damp, carrying the faint smell of river mud from the nearby marshes. Cicadas droned in the trees. I walked down the front steps slowly, careful on the loose brick at the bottom. My car sat beneath the streetlight, the hood catching the last bit of pink sky. When I closed the driver's door, the noise of the house disappeared behind me. I gripped the steering wheel and exhaled, realizing my hands were trembling. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. the lines around my mouth, the bits of flour still on my sleeve. For the first time in a long while, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. I didn't drive home right away. I sat there until the street went dark, until the lights in Ethan's house flicked off one by one. Through the living room window, I saw Brittany pass by carrying dishes, Caleb skipping behind her, Ethan trailing last with his phone still in hand. It looked ordinary, domestic, warm, complete. And for the first time, I realized they didn't see me as part of it at all. The engine started with a quiet hum. I pulled out slowly, letting the car roll past the hedges I'd planted a decade ago when the house was still ours, when family dinners ended with laughter that didn't hurt. Savannah's streets were empty, the oak trees forming long, dark arches above the road. My chest felt hollow, but my thoughts were sharp and clear. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I just drove toward my small apartment near Forsyth Park, toward the kettle waiting on the stove, toward whatever silence would come next. Behind me, the house disappeared into the night. Tomorrow, I would wake up early. I would make coffee. And for the first time in years, I would decide what stayed in my life and what didn't. The road was quiet that night, the kind of stillness that presses against your chest. Savannah after sunset always felt like another century live oaks stretching across the streets, their moss hanging low like whispers. I rolled the window down, letting the humid air in, and drove with no radio, no sound, but the soft hum of the tires on the asphalt. I didn't plan to leave without saying goodbye. It just happened that way. The moment I stepped out of that house, I knew that any word I spoke would have come out wrong, too sharp, too small, too late. The streetlights flickered across the windshield one by one, like slow, measured heartbeats. I passed the corner store where Ethan used to buy baseball cards as a boy, the school he'd cried about on his first day. Each place carried a ghost version of us, a mother who worked 2 jobs to keep his uniform pressed and lunches packed, a boy who once promised he'd take care of me one day. I had believed him. At a red light, I rested my hand on the steering wheel and thought about the bills I'd paid over the years. Mortgage insurance, their electric when Brittany's hours got cut. Little temporary helps that became habits. Every time I'd written a check, I told myself it was love. But love doesn't send automatic payments. It doesn't become a direct debit that no one thanks you for. The light turned green. I didn't move right away. I remembered the first time I met Brittany. Her perfume too strong, her smile sharp as glass. Ethan had been so proud, showing her off, the woman who understood him. I'd tried to like her. I'd even helped plan their wedding. Somewhere between the table settings and the mortgage paperwork, she began to talk to me like I was furniture that came with the house. The thought made my jaw tighten, but I didn't let anger take the wheel. Fury, when it came, was no longer loud. It was cold and clean, a kind of clarity that made every mile sharper. By the time I reached my neighborhood, the moon had come up. The little apartment complex sat beneath magnolia trees, their blossoms wide and white against the dark. My porch light was still on. I'd forgotten to switch it off earlier. Through the window, I could see the faint outline of my kettle on the counter waiting. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment listening to the ticking of the cooling car. I thought about the family still sitting at that dinner table, Ethan with his phone, Brittany with her wine glass, Caleb probably playing a game on his tablet by now. The picture was so ordinary, it hurt. Then something shifted inside me. Quiet, but decisive. I wasn't going back there. Not to defend myself. Not to demand an apology. Not to make them understand. Understanding wasn't my job anymore. I took my keys from the ignition and stepped out. The night smelled like rain and cut grass. As I locked the car, I realized my hands had stopped shaking. The silence that followed didn't feel like emptiness anymore. It felt like a door closing behind me, soft and final. Inside, I turned on the kettle, placed 1 cup on the counter, and waited for the water to boil. The hum filled the small kitchen, steady and familiar. When the whistle finally rose sharp and clean, it didn't sound lonely at all. It sounded like beginning. The tea had gone cold by the time I opened my laptop. Midnight light flickered through the kitchen blinds, soft and blue, casting stripes across the table where my bills sat in a tidy stack. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of the old ceiling fan. I had lived alone for 4 years, but it had never felt like solitude until tonight, until I realized how much of my life still revolved around people who no longer saw me. I typed in my bank password and waited for the page to load. The dashboard greeted me with neat rows of transactions, the kind of order that had always comforted me. Each line carried a name, a date, an amount. Each one was a small piece of me that had left quietly every month unnoticed. Mortgage $1,475. Home insurance $186. Utilities variable. Electric, gas, internet, cell plan, most not even mine anymore. I scrolled further. The pattern was clear and humiliating. What I had called helping my son had long become a quiet payroll for 2 households, mine and his. It started years ago when Ethan and Brittany were newly married. The first payment was supposed to be temporary, just until Brittany's job stabilized. I remember feeling proud when I offered it. It made me useful again. Needed. A mother who could still protect her grown child from the world. But months blurred into years and the temporary lines on the statement never disappeared. Tonight, looking at them, I didn't feel pride. I felt erased. I clicked the first payment mortgage and opened the settings. A small box popped up, autopay active. Below it, a simple button. Cancel. I hovered over it longer than I meant to. My finger trembled not from doubt but from the weight of years. Then I clicked. A confirmation message appeared. Autopay canceled successfully. The sound of the mouse click was small, almost polite, but it cut through me like a clean break. I did the same with the others: electricity, internet, credit card, joint account I'd co-signed for when Ethan needed to build credit. Each cancellation felt like untangling a thread from a net I hadn't known I was caught in. Halfway through, the bank's interface logged me out for security purposes. I had to log in again. It made me laugh how carefully the system guarded my information while I had never guarded my own life. By the time I reached the last payment, the clock on the wall showed 1:17 a.m. I found a small notebook beside the bills and opened it to a blank page. For years, I'd used it to track payments and due dates, every line written in my neat cursive. Now, at the bottom of the list, I wrote one last entry: mortgage canceled. I stared at the word for a long time. Cancel. It looked too final, too heavy, yet somehow right. I closed the notebook, turned off the laptop, and exhaled. The air in the kitchen felt different. Lighter but strange, as if the walls themselves were adjusting to the new math of my life. I gathered the papers into a single folder, slid it into the drawer, and shut it. The click of the latch echoed faintly through the house. Outside, the street was still. I could see the neighbor's porch light, the same one that used to annoy me for being too bright. Tonight, I didn't mind it. It was proof the world was still turning, even if mine had just shifted. I rinsed my mug, set it upside down to dry, and turned off the light. The glow of the laptop screen lingered for a second before fading to black. My reflection appeared faintly in the glass, older, steadier, no longer waiting for anyone to say thank you. For the first time in years, I had nothing left set to automatic. The message came the next morning while I was making coffee. The sun was just rising, streaking pale gold across the kitchen floor, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to calm. I had canceled everything the night before. The air in the house still smelled faintly of paperwork and lemon cleaner. Then my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "Maybe it's best we take some space, Mom. Don't contact us again for a while. It's just too much." I stared at the words for a long time. There was no anger in them, No punctuation sharp enough to cut. Just that careful tone he always used when he wanted to sound reasonable while closing a door. I set the coffee down and typed, slowly, understood. Mortgage autopay ends tomorrow. I hit send before I could think twice. The silence that followed felt almost ceremonial. I watched the 3 little dots appear, disappear, then appear again. But no reply came. I finished my coffee and went about my day folding laundry, opening windows, letting the spring air in. The quiet felt earned. By evening, I almost forgot about it. I was halfway through an old movie when my phone started buzzing again. Group chat notifications one after another. The thread that still had my name in it. At 11:42 p.m., it exploded. Brittany first. What are you talking about? Then Ethan. Wait. Mom, seriously. You're ending it just like that. Brittany, again. You can't just stop paying the mortgage. That's not how this works, Ethan. You said you'd help until the refinance went through. And then my sister-in-law chimed in as if she'd been waiting for a reason to speak. Marla, this is petty and cruel. I scrolled through, watching the lines pile up. Shock, panic, indignation. The thread moved so fast it was almost funny, everyone typing over each other, no one stopping to breathe. Then Brittany again. You're seriously going to screw over your own son. A second later, you're sick. You need help. Ethan, Mom, I can't believe you'd do this to us. I set the phone on the table and let it vibrate against the wood, the screen lighting up every few seconds like a heartbeat. I didn't reply. I poured myself another half cup of coffee, even though it was cold by now, and leaned back in the chair. When the buzzing finally stopped, I picked up the phone again. The last message was from Brittany. Don't ever message us again. You've made your choice. For a while, I just looked at it. Then I turned the phone off and placed it face down beside the sink. The house settled into its usual stillness. The refrigerator hummed softly, the clock on the wall ticked its steady rhythm, and outside a train whistle sounded faintly somewhere across the river. I washed my cup, dried it carefully, and hung the dish towel back on its hook. My body felt tired, but my mind was quiet. It wasn't peace exactly, not yet, but it was close enough to touch. The doorbell rang just after 8. I hadn't expected anyone, certainly not on a Monday morning, but when I opened the door, there she was standing with 2 paper cups of coffee and a paper bag that smelled like bagels. Morning, Danielle said, brushing past me before I could answer. Took you long enough. I blinked. To do what? To finally stop paying for everyone else's mistakes. She set the coffees on the counter, tossed her keys into the ceramic bowl by the door like she'd lived here her whole life, and started unpacking the bagels. I saw the group chat. They're losing their minds. Congratulations. I almost smiled. You read that? She shrugged. Ethan added me years ago when he wanted to borrow money for Brittany's car. Remember that I never left the group. Danielle was my mother's sister's daughter, 4 years younger than Ethan, and the only person in the family who had managed to avoid being tangled in favors and guilt. She worked in accounting for a small firm downtown, the kind of job that required exactness. Even when we were kids, she'd balanced her allowance like a professional. I used to tease her for it. Now, watching her pull out spreadsheets on her tablet, I was grateful she'd kept the habit. She opened one of the coffees and slid it toward me. We're going to do a little financial detox. I laughed softly. That sounds dangerous. Necessary, she said, scrolling through her screen. Show me your accounts. It should have felt invasive, but it didn't. Maybe because I was tired of pretending everything was fine. I turned the laptop toward her, and together we went through the numbers. Mortgage, she said, tapping her stylus. Gone. Utilities canceled. Joint credit card closed last night. Her eyes flicked up approving. You're serious this time. I think I am, I said quietly. We kept going, insurance premiums, subscriptions, streaming services. Half the charges had names I barely recognized. Danielle traced each one like a detective, clicking through tabs, making notes in her tidy handwriting. "You've been paying for their Disney Plus?" she asked, incredulous. "They don't even have kids old enough to watch Disney Plus. Caleb uses it sometimes, then let him learn to live without cartoons for a while." She grinned, but her tone was kind. When we finished, she turned the tablet toward me. "You've been running 2 households, Marla. No wonder you always look tired. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath until then." I exhaled slowly. "I thought I was helping." "You were," she said softer now. "But you can't help people who only see you as a resource. That's not family, that's payroll." The truth of it landed deep. We ate the bagels in silence for a few minutes. The kitchen smelled like toasted sesame and coffee grounds grounding simple. Outside, sunlight spilled across the magnolia leaves, and for the first time in a long while, the day felt possible. Danielle wiped her hands and stood. "All right," she said, slipping her tablet back into her bag. "Everything's clean. No more hidden drains. If they call, let it go to voicemail. You owe them nothing." I nodded. "They won't call." She smiled faintly. "They will. Give it time." After she left, the apartment felt different, not emptier, just clearer. I collected the printouts and notes we'd made, stacked them neatly on the counter, and poured myself another coffee. Through the window, I could see the soft green of the park down the street, a world that kept turning whether or not I funded it. I carried the mug to the table and sat for a while, listening to the quiet pulse of the morning. Danielle was right. The numbers were finally clean. What came next, whatever it was, would have to start from zero. By the end of that week, my apartment looked like a war room, receipts, folders, and notebooks spread across the kitchen table. Danielle came by every evening after work, her blazer still crisp hair pulled into a neat bun that somehow never unraveled. She brought determination with her along with iced coffee and the same quiet authority she'd had since we were teenagers. "Let's finish it," she said one evening, settling at the table. We started with the phone plan. My name was still attached to a family bundle I hadn't realized existed. Ethan's line, Brittany's, and one extra for home security. Danielle traced the numbers with her pen, clicking her tongue. "You're paying $60 a month for their doorbell camera." I looked at her blankly. "I don't even have one." "Exactly." She called the carrier and waited on hold, tapping her nails against the table, while the cheerful recorded voice promised us that our call was very important. When someone finally answered, Danielle switched the call to speaker and smiled at me. "Your turn." My voice shook a little at first, explaining that I wanted to remove my name close the account stop, the payments. The representative on the line offered discounts, loyalty perks, special rates. I said no to all of them. The word felt good. Click. Account closed. We moved on to loans one for Brittany's car that I'd co-signed 5 years ago. The balance still showed my name in small, inescapable letters. Danielle pulled up the lender's number. "Call again," she said. This time it was faster. I followed her instructions, filed the release request, confirmed my address. The process was bureaucratic and dull, but when it was over, something inside me loosened. "Done," she said, scribbling a checkmark beside the line item. "That's another artery unclogged." The phrase made me laugh, but it was true. Every canceled payment, every closed account was like drawing breath after being underwater for years. By the third day, we'd worked our way through the list cable streaming services insurance. Even the old joint card I'd forgotten existed. Each time a confirmation email arrived, Danielle raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. "To freedom," she said. The first time I smiled. The fifth time I actually meant it. When she finally packed up her tablet and notes, the kitchen was clean again. She hugged me at the door, quick and firm. "You did it," she said. "Now go rest. Tomorrow you'll wake up and the world will look different." She was right. That night the apartment was so quiet it startled me. The hum of the refrigerator seemed louder, the tick of the clock sharper. I turned off every light except the one above the sink and sat at the table with a glass of water. Outside the city moved faintly distant traffic. A bark, a train whistle, far across the river, but inside, it was only me. I'd expected relief to feel light like wind rushing in after years of suffocation. Instead, it settled heavy in my chest, slow and unfamiliar. I realized how much noise I had lived with all these years, the texts, the bills, the constant mental math of who needed what and when. Now there was only silence. I went to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, running my hand over the quilt. The night air came through the window soft and cool, smelling faintly of rain. My phone, resting on the nightstand, stayed dark. No messages, no new calls. For once, I didn't reach for it. I lay back, staring at the ceiling. The quiet felt strange, like stepping into a new language and realizing you understand only fragments. I knew this was what I wanted, this distance, this clean break, but the body takes longer than the mind to catch up. It still expects the next demand, the next apology that never arrives. Sometime after midnight, I rose and went to the kitchen again. I poured another glass of water, turned on the small lamp by the window, and looked outside. The street was empty, except for the steady flicker of a streetlight. For a long time, I stood there watching it blink on and off, a rhythm that was neither warm nor cold, just steady, unbothered. It reminded me of something Danielle had said the first night we started all this. "You've been running their lives so long you forgot yours still runs fine without them." She was right again. The air felt clearer now, even if the silence had teeth. I switched off the lamp, breathed in the stillness, and let the quiet settle exactly where it belonged. 3 days passed without a sound from Ethan or Brittany. The quiet had settled into something that almost resembled peace. I spent my mornings walking along the square, buying fresh bread from the corner bakery, pretending my life had always been this still. But peace, I was learning, doesn't always last. It only waits. On Thursday, Danielle stopped by after work, still in her navy blazer, a look on her face that I couldn't quite read. She didn't bother with greetings. "You need to see this," she said, setting her tablet on the table. The screen glowed with the soft blue of a fundraising page. At the top, a photo, Brittany hair perfectly styled, holding Caleb in her arms. They were standing in front of Ethan's house, smiling like it was a family portrait for a holiday card. The title read, "Help Our Family Through a Tough Year." My stomach tightened. Danielle scrolled down. Read the description. It started with a few sentimental lines about unexpected hardships and medical bills, then slipped into something more theatrical. "We've been betrayed by those we trusted most. Now we're starting over alone." There was no mention of names, no specific illnesses, no details at all. Just that one word that caught in my throat, betrayal. Below it, a single donation appeared. $10. From Ethan. Danielle crossed her arms. "They're not even good at lying." I leaned back, the air in the kitchen suddenly too warm. "So this is what they do now," I murmured. "Beg strangers for sympathy." "It's worse than that," she said. "They're using pity to rewrite the story." I didn't answer. My eyes stayed on the photo, Brittany's smile a little too bright, Ethan's hand on Caleb's shoulder. They looked wholesome, complete, like a family wronged by the world. If someone didn't know the truth, they'd probably click donate without a second thought. Danielle's voice softened. "You okay?" I nodded, though the motion felt mechanical. I couldn't stop staring at the number, $10 raised of a $5,000 goal. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. But beneath the bitterness, something else stirred. Unease. If this was about attention, fine. Let them have it. But medical bills wasn't the kind of phrase you threw around for drama. The word carried a different weight. Real or not, it meant they were reaching. And reaching usually meant desperation. "Do you think Caleb's actually sick?" I asked quietly. Danielle hesitated. I don't know, but if he were, don't you think they'd tell you directly? I wanted to believe she was right. That it was just another manipulation, another performance crafted for sympathy clicks. But a part of me, the same part that had once packed Ethan's lunches and stayed up nights nursing his fevers, couldn't ignore the tremor of doubt. I closed the tablet gently. Leave it, I said. If they want attention, they can have it. I'm not giving them mine. Danielle studied me for a moment, then nodded. She gathered her things, the scrape of her chair the only sound between us. Before she left, she touched my shoulder lightly. Just promise me you won't open it again, she said. After she was gone, I sat alone in the dim light, the echo of her words still in the room. Outside, rain began to fall slow at first, then steady against the windows. I made myself a cup of tea, watching the ripples form on the surface. The image from the fundraiser lingered in my mind. Brittany's painted smile, Caleb's small shoulders. I told myself it was just another lie, but the feeling in my chest said otherwise. Something had shifted quiet, but certain, and I couldn't yet tell whether it was fear or pity. The message came close to midnight, the screen lighting up my dark bedroom like a flare. For a moment, I thought it was one of Danielle's late-night check-ins, but it wasn't her name on the screen. Brittany, you have every right to hate me, but Caleb's sick. He needs surgery. Please. I sat up slowly, heart pounding. The words blurred for a second before they settled cold and clear. I read them again and again. The room felt smaller, as if the air itself had thickened. I turned on the lamp. Its pale yellow light fell across the nightstand, catching the edges of the old family photo I kept there Ethan as a boy. No older than Caleb is now, laughing with cake on his cheeks. The resemblance had always been there, right down to the eyes. For a long minute, I didn't move. My first instinct was disbelief, another ploy, another guilt trip. Then anger rose quick and sharp. How dare she use my grandson's name to reach me after everything she'd said, after spitting in my plate, after mocking me in that kitchen. She now wanted compassion. But beneath the anger, something else stirred, a tremor I couldn't name. I got up, found my robe, and walked to the kitchen. The tile was cool under my bare feet. The phone sat on the counter, the message still open, its glow steady in the dark. I stared at it for another moment before opening the laptop. If this was a lie, I needed to know. The hospital name was easy enough to guess, Memorial Health, the one closest to Ethan's house. I found the number for the billing department and called, half expecting a closed line. A sleepy voice answered after a few rings. Billing office, the woman said. I'm sorry to call this late, I said. I just need to confirm something. Is there a patient named Caleb Greer scheduled for surgery this week? There was a pause, the soft clicking of keys. One moment. I held my breath. Yes, ma'am, she said finally. Procedure scheduled for Friday morning. Partial payment required by Wednesday to hold the slot. I thanked her, hung up, and just stood there. The clock on the stove read 12:47 a.m. So it was true. My anger didn't vanish. It simply lost its edge. In its place came something slower, heavier. Caleb was 10 years old. 10. The same age Ethan had been when I worked double shifts to afford his braces, when I thought exhaustion was a kind of love. I poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter. The refrigerator hummed quietly beside me. I didn't owe Brittany anything. That truth sat solid in my chest. But Caleb wasn't her. He wasn't Ethan either. He was a child caught in the fallout of choices too big for him to understand. And no matter how much I told myself I was done, I couldn't shake the image of him scared in a hospital bed waiting. I closed the laptop and carried the phone back to the table. The screen was dark now, but the message glowed in my mind. At 1:12 a.m., I typed a reply. What surgery? What hospital? It didn't take long for her to answer. Memorial. Heart valve repair. We lost our insurance months ago. Please don't tell Ethan I reached out. He'll be furious. I stared at the words, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to ask 100 questions, wanted to remind her of everything she'd done, every cruel word. Instead, I wrote only one sentence, "I'll think about it." Then I turned off the phone. Back in bed. Sleep wouldn't come. The ceiling seemed too bright, my thoughts too loud. I kept hearing the nurse's voice, Friday morning partial payment required, and the small, fragile truth underneath it. Not everything broken can be left behind. When dawn came, the sky over Savannah was pale gray and heavy with mist. I got up, made coffee, and stood at the window watching the trees sway. My anger had cooled, but it hadn't disappeared. It had simply made room for something more complicated, a quiet understanding that compassion, when it returns, has to come with rules. Whatever I did next, it would be on my terms. By morning, I had made my decision. It wasn't forgiveness, not even pity, just a choice carved out of practicality, and something quieter, something I didn't have a name for. I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad, the same one where I used to jot down grocery lists and payment schedules. The page was blank, except for a single line at the top, Memorial Health Pediatric Surgery Department. I'd written it at dawn right after Brittany's last message. Beneath it, I listed what I could afford without tipping my own life back into dependence. The number came to 40% of the quoted cost. No more, no less. I called Danielle before the bank opened. She answered on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Tell me you didn't send them money." "I didn't," I said. "Not to them. I'm sending it to the hospital directly." There was a pause. "You're sure I am?" Danielle sighed, that soft mix of frustration and reluctant respect. "You always did have your own definition of mercy." "I'm not doing it for her," I said. "It's for the boy." "I know," she said quietly. "But make sure it's clean. Paper trail receipts, everything." By 9, I was at the bank. The teller was a young man with kind eyes who greeted me with the sort of brightness that comes from still believing life can be organized neatly. I filled out the wire form carefully, double-checking every number. The form required a memo line. I hesitated for a moment, then wrote Caleb Greer, surgical prepayment partial. When he handed me the confirmation slip, I felt the weight of the past few months shift slightly, like the sound of a door clicking shut. "Would you like me to print you a copy for your records?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Please." The paper was still warm from the printer when he passed it to me. I folded it into thirds, slid it into my wallet, and thanked him. Outside, the morning air was thick and bright. I walked slowly to my car, taking in the hum of traffic, the smell of wet asphalt. Savannah was waking up, delivery trucks, cyclists, the faint ring of church bells. Everything looked ordinary, which made the decision feel both smaller and larger than it was. Back home, I made another cup of coffee and sat by the window. My phone buzzed with a message, Brittany again. "Are you serious?" she wrote. Then a few seconds later, "Thank you, I mean it, thank you." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the email from the hospital confirming receipt of payment. It included a short note from billing. "Your contribution has been applied directly to the patient account. Remaining balance due by Thursday." Clean, simple. No guilt attached. For the first time in a long while, money had gone somewhere and meant exactly what it said. It wasn't leverage or apology. It was a line drawn firmly in ink. That evening, I cooked dinner. Nothing fancy. Just soup and bread. The house felt steady, like it had found its own rhythm again. As I ate, I thought of Caleb. I didn't picture him in a hospital bed or imagine dramatic scenes. I just saw his small, serious face, the way it had been the last time I'd seen him, unaware of how adults can twist love into power. The wind outside rattled the magnolia branches against the window. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in the scent of the soup, the quiet of the room. On the counter, the printed receipt lay where I'd left it. A simple record of a transaction, nothing more. Yet somehow, looking at it, I felt lighter. It wasn't generosity. It wasn't redemption. It was something cleaner than both a reclamation of choice. I folded it once more, placed it in the drawer beside my canceled bills, and let the house return to silence. The package arrived 3 days after the payment cleared. No return address, no name, just my own written neatly in black marker across the front. It was light, but oddly solid, the kind of weight that meant something inside was waiting to be remembered. I carried it to the kitchen table and set it down beside my coffee mug. The tape was uneven, like someone had done it in a hurry. For a moment, I thought about throwing it away, unopened. Anything from them could only mean trouble. But curiosity, slow and cautious, won out. Inside was a plain cardboard box, the kind grocery stores use for fruit. The smell of old paper rose as soon as I lifted the flaps. I recognized it immediately. The faint, dusty sweetness of photographs that have lived too long in a drawer. The first thing I saw was a stack of pictures bound with a rubber band that had gone brittle with time. Beneath them were more loose snapshots, Polaroids, a few faded envelopes from old film labs. I slid the bundle free and let the images spill out onto the table. There we were, Ethan at 7, standing in front of his first bike. Me in the background caught mid-laugh, a sun hat tilted too far to one side. Another Ethan and my husband long before he left, both holding up a sandcastle that had collapsed before the photo was taken. Our dog, Daisy. Birthdays. Christmas mornings. The kind of ordinary miracles I hadn't looked at in years. The edges of some photos were curled, the colors washed into amber and soft blue. I turned them over one by one, tracing the scrawled dates on the backs. 1994, 1999, 2003. Each year, another piece of life I'd stored away without meaning to. Halfway through the pile, a small, folded sheet of notebook paper slid out. My name wasn't on it. There was no greeting, no signature, only a short message written in uneven handwriting that I knew too well. We were wrong. I'm sorry, that was all. I sat very still, the paper trembling slightly between my fingers. The handwriting was a mix of two people's habits, Ethan's block letters at the start, Brittany's looser slant near the end. I could almost see them passing the pen back and forth, deciding how little they could say without having to explain anything. I placed the note beside my mug and stared at it until the letters blurred. I didn't feel relief, not really. More like an ache, familiar and heavy, the kind that comes from hearing something too late to matter. Outside, the sky was the color of pewter. A light rain had started tapping softly against the windows. I gathered the photographs back into a pile, though they refused to fit neatly together. Faces overlapped Ethan's toothless grin, my own younger smile, the house that used to feel like home. Somewhere beneath the stack, a Polaroid caught my eye. It was from the beach the summer Ethan turned 12. He was holding a paper kite against the wind eyes, bright, the ocean behind him blurring into silver. I remembered that day, the long drive, the smell of salt, his laughter spilling out across the waves. For a moment, the memory was sharp enough to hurt. I slipped the photo back into the box, tucking the note beneath it. My hands lingered there for a second longer, pressing the lid down as if sealing something fragile inside. Then I carried the box to the hallway closet, found an empty shelf, and set it there. When I closed the door, I half expected to feel lighter. I didn't. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was weight. The kind that reminds you that even when people can't say the words out loud, the past has its own way of speaking. The rain outside deepened to a steady rhythm. I made another cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched it blur the streetlights into soft halos. The box stayed hidden in the dark of the closet, quiet, patient, and alive with everything that used to be. Nearly 3 weeks passed before I heard from him again. The text came on a Tuesday afternoon, short and hesitant. Can we meet? Just dinner. I'll come alone. I stared at the message for a long while before replying. 1 hour. The cafe on Bull Street. The place I chose was quiet, the kind of spot people forget exists. A few mismatched tables, the low hum of jazz in the background coffee, strong enough to hold conversation without letting it unravel. I arrived early and chose a seat by the window. Outside, the late spring rain fell in slow silver streaks, softening the edges of the world. Ethan was 5 minutes late. When he walked in, he looked older than I remembered, shoulders slightly stooped, the tiredness of someone who had been trying too hard to look fine. He spotted me and hesitated, then crossed the room. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "Hi." I gestured to the chair across from me. "You look tired." He sat exhaled. "I am." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The waitress came, refilled my coffee, and asked what he'd like. He ordered tea, the same kind he used to drink as a boy when he couldn't sleep. That small familiarity twisted something inside me. "I don't know where to start," he said finally, rubbing the edge of his napkin. "Everything I say will sound like an excuse." "Then don't start there," I said. He nodded, staring down at his hands. "I let things happen. I let Brittany talk, make jokes, cross lines. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't stop her. I told myself it would keep the peace, that you could handle it." The words came slowly, haltingly, but they were honest. "Why?" I asked. He looked up, then eyes rimmed red. "Because I was scared. Not of her, of what she'd say about me if I defended you. She's good at turning things. I didn't want to start another fight. So I stayed quiet. The confession hung between us, heavy and unsteady. Outside, the rain thickened, tapping softly against the glass. "You think staying silent made it better?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, it made me smaller." Something in his voice cracked, not with self-pity, but with something deeper, recognition. "I've been trying to fix things," he said. "For Caleb. For you. But I don't know how to begin." "You already did," I said. He looked surprised. "By showing up, by telling the truth," I said. "Even if it's late." He leaned back in his chair, the tension in his shoulders easing just a little. For the first time since he'd walked in, he met my eyes without flinching. "Brittany told me about the payment," he said quietly. 40%. "You didn't have to do that. I know," she cried. He said almost to himself. "I didn't think she could." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. He went on, his voice softer now. "When Caleb was in the hospital, he kept asking where you were. I told him you were helping in your own way. He didn't really understand, but he smiled. I think he gets it now." I traced the rim of my cup with one finger, watching the steam curl up and disappear. "How is he?" "Better," Ethan said. "Recovering. He's been drawing again. That's good." We sat in silence after that, the kind that isn't awkward but fragile, like glass between two people who've broken too much of it before. "I can't ask you to forgive us," he said after a while. "I don't even know if that's possible, but I needed you to hear me say I'm sorry. For all of it." The word sorry didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded like a wound reopening. I nodded slowly. "I hear you," I said. "That's enough for now." The waitress came by, dropped off the check, and left us alone again. Ethan reached for it automatically, and for once I let him. When we stood to leave, he hesitated. "Can I call you sometime, just to talk?" "Yes," I said, "but not to fix the past. Just to talk." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't erase pain but acknowledges it. I'd like that. Outside, the rain had stopped. The street glistened under the lamplight, the air washed clean. We walked to our cars without saying goodbye, but the silence felt different this time. Not like distance, but like space being cleared for something new. When I reached home, the smell of damp earth followed me inside. I hung up my coat, set my keys in the bowl, and stood for a long moment in the stillness. The house hadn't changed, but the quiet no longer pressed against me. It rested beside me instead, an old companion that finally knew how to keep its distance. It was late afternoon when I heard the knock. Not the sharp, entitled tapping I remembered, but a hesitant rhythm. 3 soft knocks, a pause, then one more almost apologetic. I opened the door and found Brittany standing there. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her face was bare of makeup, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, and the confidence she used to wear like perfume had vanished. In her hands, she held a plain white envelope. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi." For a moment, neither of us moved. The air between us felt careful, like something fragile could shatter with the wrong word. "Can I come in?" she asked. I hesitated, but stepped aside. Of course, she walked into the living room, glancing around as if expecting everything to look different. It didn't. The same couch, the same framed photographs, the same faint scent of coffee and old wood. Only I had changed. "I won't stay long," she said. I needed to give you something." She held out the envelope. Inside was a check, $4,000. The amount startled me, though I didn't show it. "What's this?" I asked. "It's from me," she said. "Not Ethan. Not anyone else, just me. I've been selling things, clothes, old jewelry, whatever I could. And I'm selling my wedding ring next week." I looked at her at the way her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. The woman who once mocked me across the dinner table was gone. This one spoke softly, as if afraid her voice might break. "You don't have to." "I do," she interrupted. "I need to. I want to start from zero." Her voice cracked on the last word and she took a slow breath, steadying herself. I thought I knew everything she said. I thought control meant strength, but when Caleb got sick, I realized how wrong I was. I couldn't control anything. Not his body, not the fear, not the way Ethan looked at me when the bills came in. She sat down on the edge of the couch, the check still in my hand. "I used to think you were cold," she continued, "distant. But now I see you were just tired from carrying everything we threw at you, and I made it worse. I wanted to look away, but I didn't." Her words came like small stones hitting water, creating ripples I couldn't stop. "I can't undo what I said to you," she whispered. "That night at dinner, what I did, it was disgusting. I wish I could take it back." Every single word. The silence stretched long between us. Outside, I could hear the low hum of cicadas, the soft rustle of wind through the magnolias. "You don't owe me this," I said finally. "Money doesn't fix what happened." "I know," she said, "but it's something real. Something I can put down to prove I'm done pretending. I can't change who I was, but I can pay back what I took." Her eyes filled but didn't spill over. There was no performance in her tears, no manipulation, just exhaustion. I folded the check, placed it back in the envelope, and set it on the table. "I'll hold on to it for now," I said. "Think about whether you truly want me to keep it." She nodded. "That's fair." As she stood to leave, she paused by the door. "I told Ethan I needed to come alone," she said. "He wanted to apologize again, but I told him this one had to come from me." I nodded. It did. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carries both regret and relief. "Thank you," she said, for not slamming the door. When she walked down the path toward her car, the sunlight caught her hand. The ring was still there, but barely its diamond, dull, its band worn thin. I watched until her car disappeared down the street, the echo of her words still hanging in the room. On the table, the envelope sat untouched, small but heavy with meaning. The house was silent again, but it wasn't the same kind of silence as before. It was softer now, threaded with something unfamiliar, respect maybe, or the faint sound of something finally being laid to rest. The envelope arrived on a gray Thursday morning, tucked among bills and advertisements. It was addressed in uneven, looping letters that slanted across the paper child's handwriting. No return address, just my name written in blue crayon. I knew before I opened it. Inside was a folded sheet of lined notebook paper and a drawing. The picture came first. Two stick figures sitting on a park bench under a bright orange sun. One had brown hair like mine, the other a small mop of yellow meant to be his. Above them, a red heart floated awkwardly in the air. At the bottom, in thick green crayon, he'd written, "Sorry I was mean. Thank you for helping me not die." The words hit harder than any apology could have. My throat closed before the tears came. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same spot where I'd once canceled every autopay, the same place I'd written cancel beside my own name. The morning light filtered through the blinds in narrow stripes, falling across the drawing like ribbons. For a long time, I just stared at it, my hands trembling slightly. I hadn't cried since that night at dinner, not when the messages came, not when the silence followed, not even when the box of photographs arrived. But this small, uneven scrawl opened something I thought I'd buried for good. I pressed the paper against my chest, and the tears came fast and quiet. They weren't heavy like before. They didn't carry shame or anger. They were clean. When they stopped, I unfolded the letter again, smoothing the creases with my fingers. His misspelling of thank you made me smile through the ache. He hadn't signed it Love Caleb. Just Love C, like it was too big a word to write out in full. The kettle whistled on the stove, pulling me back to the room. I poured a cup of tea and sat with the drawing propped up against the sugar jar. The crayon colors looked brighter in the morning light, clumsy, uneven, completely sincere. I thought about the last time I'd seen him, the way he'd looked at me across that dinner table before spitting in my plate. I'd told myself that moment defined us forever, that some lines couldn't be crossed back over. But children live differently in time. They don't carry things the same way adults do. Their forgiveness doesn't ask for logic. It just arrives uninvited but pure. I found an old picture frame in the hall closet, wiped the dust off the glass, and placed the drawing inside. It didn't fit perfectly. The edges stuck out one corner, slightly bent. But it didn't matter. I set it on the mantel beside the faded photo of Ethan as a boy with frosting on his chin. Then I sat back, letting the quiet fill the house again. This time it didn't sting. Somewhere in that clumsy scrawl of crayons and apology, something in me shifted. Not erased, not undone, but softened. Outside, the sky began to clear, thin streaks of sunlight breaking through the clouds. I stayed at the table until the tea cooled, tracing the heart in the drawing with my fingertip over and over, as if memorizing the shape of forgiveness. 2 weeks after Caleb's letter arrived, I got another text from Ethan. "We found a place," it read. "Small house on Abercorn Street. 10 minutes from you. When it's ready, we'd like you to see it." I stared at the message for a long time before answering. Just okay, nothing more. Abercorn Street ran through one of Savannah's older neighborhoods, narrow sidewalks, low oak branches, the kind of houses that leaned slightly but kept their dignity. I drove past it once on my way to the market and thought how strange it was that my son might soon be living there so close I could almost walk to him. Danielle called that evening. When I told her, she paused. "How do you feel about it?" "I'm not sure," I said. "Closer doesn't always mean safer." "Maybe not," she said, "but it might mean possible." The next weekend, Ethan called instead of texting. His voice was cautious, as if testing the temperature of the water before stepping in. "We got the keys," he said. "Still a lot of work to do, but I think you'd like it. It's old like your place." I smiled faintly. "That's supposed to be a compliment." "Yeah," he said. "The good kind." He told me about the tiny backyard where Caleb wanted to plant tomatoes, about the cracked porch steps Brittany planned to repaint. Every detail carried a quiet sincerity, the sort that doesn't ask for forgiveness, but builds toward it piece by piece. "I'll come by once you've settled," I said finally. He sounded relieved. That's all I wanted to hear. A few days later, I drove by again, slower this time. The house was small, 1-story white, siding in need of paint. A bicycle leaned against the porch railing, and a single curtain fluttered in the window. Through the open door, I caught a glimpse of Brittany kneeling on the floor beside a half-open box. She was unpacking something. Maybe dishes, maybe memories. Caleb sat on the porch steps, drawing on a piece of cardboard with crayons. When he looked up and saw my car, he smiled and lifted the paper high, waving it in the air. I couldn't read what it was from where I sat, but I waved back before driving on. That night, I left my porch light on longer than usual, not out of hope or habit, but as a quiet acknowledgement that things could exist in between anger and grace, between distance and return. Savannah's air was soft that evening, carrying the scent of rain and cut grass. I stood by the window, thinking about the little house on Abercorn Street and how close it suddenly felt. Not just in miles, but in the kind of space that might one day allow love to breathe again. Thursday mornings became my favorite part of the week. It started quietly, the way all good things do, Danielle, convincing me to join her pottery class at the community center downtown. "It'll keep your hands busy," she said. "You've spent long enough holding everything together for everyone else. Time to shape something just for you." The first day, the studio smelled of wet clay and coffee. Sunlight poured through tall windows, catching the fine dust that floated in the air. Around us, half a dozen people stood at their wheels, bent in concentration, the rhythmic hum of the spinning clay filling the space. My first attempts were disasters. Lopsided bowls, collapsing cups. Clay that refused to center, no matter how many times I tried. Danielle laughed softly each time I sighed in frustration. "It's not supposed to be perfect," she said, steadying my hands. "It just has to hold together long enough to dry." I smiled despite myself. "That's a low bar." "Then you'll meet it," she said. Weeks passed, and the pieces began to take shape uneven. Yes, but mine. I brought home a small vase one afternoon, its surface rough but proudly intact, and placed it on the windowsill. It looked out of place at first, among the neat order of my house, but after a while, it belonged. When I wasn't at the studio, I volunteered at the literacy center near Forsyth Park. Twice a week, I sat with adults who were learning to read. For the first time, waitresses, retirees, a bus driver who wanted to read bedtime stories to his grandson. Their determination was quiet but fierce, and I found something in their struggle that mirrored my own, the need to reclaim what had been neglected too long. At night, I filled my hours with small rituals, watering the plants, reading until sleep came, walking the narrow streets near the river when the air turned cool. Life didn't feel like survival anymore. It felt steady. Sometimes I'd catch myself waiting for the phone to ring for the next apology or crisis, but it stayed silent. And in that silence, I discovered something I hadn't known I was missing. Peace doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it comes softly shaped by your own hands, drying slow in the sun, until one morning you realize it's strong enough to hold water. The note arrived on a Sunday morning, tucked inside my mailbox, between a grocery flyer and a utility bill. The handwriting was unmistakable, large, uneven, done with effort. It read, "Hi, Grandma, we're having a family dinner. Mom says she's using the good plates. Please come. Love, Caleb." I read it twice before setting it down on the counter. The word family lingered like a whisper I hadn't heard in years. Danielle came by later that afternoon. I showed her the note and she raised an eyebrow. "The good plates," she said, smirking. "That's serious diplomacy." I laughed softly. He must have practiced this. She looked at me carefully. "Are you going?" "I think I have to," I said. "Not because they asked. Because I want to see what this really is." She reached for her purse and pulled out her phone. "Fine," she said. "But text me every hour. If you don't, I'm calling in a rescue mission." I smiled. Deal. That evening, I stood in front of the mirror, unsure what to wear. I settled on a soft blue dress I hadn't touched in years, simple and comfortable. The color reminded me of calm skies, something steady to carry with me. As I locked the door, the air outside felt cool against my skin. The drive to Abercorn Street was quiet, the late sun slipping behind the magnolias. For once, I wasn't rehearsing what I'd say or bracing for what I might hear. When I pulled up in front of the little house, the porch light was already on. Through the window, I saw shadows moving 3 figures, one small and laughing. I took a breath, opened the car door, and walked toward the light. The porch light glowed softly as I stepped up to the door. Before I could knock, it opened. Brittany stood there, apron dusted with flour, her hair loose around her face. She smiled, small, uncertain, but real. "Come in," she said. "Dinner's almost ready." Inside, the air smelled of roast chicken and fresh bread. The table was smaller than I remembered, crowded with mismatched plates and a vase of wildflowers at the center. Ethan looked up from pouring water into glasses, and his face broke into a quiet smile. "Mom," he said. "You made it." Caleb ran up from the hallway, his socks sliding on the floor. "I made you something." He handed me a folded napkin carefully written in green marker. "Grandma Marla." My name wobbled across the fabric like a promise. "Thank you," I said, my voice softer than I meant. We sat down together. Brittany served me first. The gesture was small, but her hands trembled as she set the plate in front of me. For a moment, our eyes met. There was no performance, no pretense, only acknowledgement. Ethan raised his glass. To starting over, he said. We clinked glasses, and for the first time in years, laughter filled the room. Not sharp or mocking, but gentle, easy. The sound of it startled me, then warmed me. After dessert, Brittany disappeared into the kitchen and returned holding a small silver key. She placed it on the table in front of me. "For the new house," she said quietly. "Visit or don't. Your choice." I looked at the key for a long moment before smiling. This time I said, "I'll choose when to stay." Outside, the evening breeze moved through the open window, carrying the faint scent of rain. The laughter that followed wasn't forced. It was light, ordinary, and for the first time kind.